Hi friends, Carl here again with Calm Survival, and today we're going to look at liquid fuel stoves, petroleum stoves in particular. Now I have two stoves here that I'll use to be representative of the wide variety of stoves that are on the market. They don't all take this form factor, but they do share the characteristic of burning petroleum fuels. Now, in general, most of these types of stoves can be adapted or set up to burn either white gas, which is functionally the equivalent of gasoline, or kerosene, which is again functionally the equivalent of diesel fuel. Many stoves will actually run gasoline or diesel fuel as well. It's generally not ideal. We'll get into that. But they don't necessarily take this shape all the time, which is the main point. Now, the way they generally work, and I'll use this MSR WhisperLite International as our demonstration, is that you have your fuel line. So the fuel tank itself holds fuel pressure. It's pressurized with a small pump. Fuel comes in, and as you can see, it loops up into the area where the flame is going to be. This vaporizes the fuel. The fuel then comes down to the bottom and is directed up through a little jet inside of that tube. And that creates a Venturi effect, which sucks oxygen up as well, and you get the flame coming in around the ring. On this other stove, which happens to be an MSR Dragonfly, the fuel essentially comes straight in, and due to a little bit different design, the fuel is heated by this block. The fuel then hits the bottom side of this cone and is forced out the sides. Now you can get these in a much larger format as a large two-burner Coleman style stove. Coleman still makes them. And even smaller units than these that are more adapted for smaller backpacking trips. Biggest advantage of this type of stove is probably the fuel density. I'll put a picture here of the difference between my 3 kilogram propane bottle and the equivalent amount of fuel in the MSR fuel bottles. So rough equivalents. By weight, there's not a lot of difference in fuel density between white gas and propane. How you work out the efficiencies is another question. We can, for the sake of argument, say that by weight, they're functionally equivalent, but obviously, when you convert that into what that volume is going to be, you can see that there is a pretty big difference. And that's why these stoves are so prized in long endurance expeditions and things like that. These will output a lot of heat. That is one thing that liquid fuel stoves or petroleum fuel stoves share, is that even down to very, very cold temperatures, as long as everything is running well, they do put out an amazing amount of heat. Now, there are some downsides. These are somewhat complicated to maintain. There's a lot of little seals and O-rings. This area here where the fuel is evaporated, if we consider our school science courses, if you evaporate a liquid, whatever was dissolved in it stays behind. Well, this will build up with deposits. Any liquid fuel stove will have this happen. So you have to periodically clean this. The jet periodically needs to clean. You can already see, I mean, this is a fairly well-used stove, but I do keep it reasonably clean. You can see the carbon buildup that happens. Your fuel quality matters. While these will run on just about anything, at one point, MSR listed in their advertising for the Whisperlite International that it would burn everything short of melted yak butter, which I believe that's not always going to be pleasant. So that's an advantage, but you are making the compromise to how efficient that stove can ever be, because it's going to be accepting a wider variety of fuels. Another big downside to liquid stoves in general is that by and large, they do not simmer very well. You have to control both the fuel flow using this little valve on the fuel pump, but also the pressure inside the fuel bottle. That takes practice. It takes a lot of work. Now, the Dragonfly, very specifically, has a special secondary valve that allows it to simmer a lot better. That makes it a bit unusual. So, in general, everything has a price. Every compromise is something that you have to weigh out yourself. But just know that these are not going to necessarily be as easy to use as most other stovetops, cooktops, things that you're probably more familiar with. You're getting a moderate to high heat pretty much all the time. Now, with these stoves, they often come with this style of stove will often come with a windshield set. Okay. In our purposes, that's not as important because we can probably find ourselves a place out of the wind. But that is one of the other factors. And it does hold relevance to many types of stoves. Wind will always be something you'll have to manage. Now, I would definitely not use one of these indoors, even if they're running well. Burning fumes, like the gasoline fumes or the white gas fumes, are definitely unpleasant. Kerosene is even worse. And so this would definitely be an outdoor stove. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these outside, and I'm going to show you a bit how they work. So as you can see, we've pumped up the fuel bottles. We're just putting some fuel into the bottom of the stove for priming. That's preheating the stove because we need to get that tube, which is also called the generator, hot enough to vaporize the fuel. Remember, it works largely the same in both stoves, and this will be indicative of most petroleum fuel stoves that you'll come across. There'll be some variation of this. You can see the slight differences. The Whisperlite flares up quite a lot more, and the Dragonfly, you need to know which valve is open. So you can see with the two valves, you need to be a bit more organized. Once the stoves get up to temp, you'll see the flame start to drop off, and then I'll adjust them into the cooking mode. So this is fairly representative of what to expect with most petroleum stoves. Obviously, with kerosene, you'll be getting more smoke and soot being generated. Gasoline, you'd be getting more fumes and vapors. But with white gas, this is about as good as it gets. Anyways, thanks for hanging out. This has been Carl with Calm Survival, and we'll see you again soon.